Criss by Lynn Ray Perkins. Chapter 15. Guitar Progress. It wasn't that hard to make one beautiful sound on the guitar. The easiest thing in the world was to hold down the 2 strings for the E minor chord and draw your thumb across all 6 strings down below. A really beautiful sound, melancholy but satisfying. Hector was developing calluses on his fingertips, which was good. He could play some songs and sing them at the same time. This land is your land, green sleeves, a few others. Sometimes he felt fine about where he was, and sometimes it seemed that there was no road that led from the church basement guitar class to where he wanted to go. Sometimes he couldn't even remember where that was, or why he'd wanted to go there. But he'd gotten into the habit of going into his room and picking up the guitar. And once he picked it up, he did all the things he knew how to do, then messed around a little bit. A lot, sometimes. End of Chapter 15. Chapter 16. Homework. Lenny dropped his books on the bed and picked up a magazine. The creak of floorboards in his parents' bedroom told him that his father was awake. His dad, Leon, was on 3rd shift, sleeping all day with the curtains drawn and waking up in mid-afternoon to the aromas of the beginnings of dinner. Onions and celery softening in melted butter. It wasn't a bad way to wake up. There was still some afternoon and a full evening ahead. Working day shift, you got home around this same time, but you could be too tired to enjoy it. That was just his opinion. Leon opened his bedroom door and walked the 2 steps to Lenny's open doorway. "Good morning," he said. The afternoon light was dim and indirect on this side of the house, but it was enough to make him squint as his eyes adjusted. The movement of squinting triggered the tumbling down of a few more locks of dark hair onto his forehead. "Good morning," said Lenny. He had to grin at his dad's face, unshaven and puffy with sleep, eyelids hunched together to keep out the brightness that wasn't even bright. "You didn't get enough beauty sleep," he said. "You better go back to bed." "I don't think it would do any good," said his dad. "Listen, we have some time before dinner. Can you give me a hand getting that old washing machine out of the cellar? There's a guy at work who wants it. He fixes them up and sells them." "Sure," said Lenny. And they went down into the basement, which was more of a solid than a space. It was a Chinese puzzle made out of a haphazard accumulation of snow tires, lawn chairs, suitcases, cases of unreturned pop and beer bottles, picnic coolers, furniture, and boxes of dishes from Lenny's grandmother's house that Eddie didn't like, but Leon couldn't bear to get rid of, along with boxes no one had even peeked in for years. Who knew what all was in there? The washing machine was roughly in the center of the whole mess, its shiny, rounded surface glinting out from under a couple of rolled-up carpets and clothesline props. Extricating it without causing the entire arrangement to collapse would be like pulling out the middle pickup stick. A really heavy pickup stick. Lenny and Leon studied the situation. "We should get rid of some of this stuff. Clean this place up," said Leon. "You think so?" said Lenny. "You could make a nice TV room down here," said Leon. "Yup," said Lenny. He didn't bother thinking about this idea. He'd heard it before, and he knew it wasn't going to happen. "I think I can climb up and roll those carpets back a little and push the dresser sideways a couple inches, turn the bikes so they're straight. Then we'll only have to move the boxes in front out of the way, and we can drag the washer right out." "Let's give it a try," said his dad. Leon was strong, and Lenny was starting to get strong, too. Together they hefted the washing machine up the narrow cellar steps, one at a time. "Does anyone still even use this kind?" asked Lenny during a pause. It was a wringer washer, with rollers. "I guess someone does," said Leon. "I told him what it was, and he said he'd give me $20 for it. I figured it was worth it just to get it out of here." They banged out through the screen door and set the heavy monster down on the stoop before the final heave and shuffle over the gravel and up onto the bed of the pickup. With a final grating screech, they shoved it toward the cab, then secured it with a complex arrangement of rope. "Success," said Lenny. Through her open window, Debbie could hear their voices and all the banging, shuffling, and scraping noise, but none of it registered. She was doing homework, and she was absorbed in thought. She didn't know his middle name. That could be the tiebreaker. She was doing the game Flame with her name and Dan Persick's name, where you write down your names, cross off the letters that are in both, then count the letters that are left and see where it takes you on the word flame. For example, Debbie and Dan both have D in common, so you cross out both D's, which leaves you 7 letters, E, B, B, I, E, and A, N. Flame, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and L stands for lovers. However, Deborah and Daniel, if you cross out the D and the E and the A, because both names have them, leaves only 5 letters, and E out of Flame stands for enemies. So Dan Persick and Debbie Pelbry was E for enemies, while Daniel Persick and Deborah Pelbry was another L. The forms had to match, both just first names, both full names, and so on. The other letters stood for friends, affectionate, and married. So there was a pretty good chance of something good. It was funny that they had the same initials. In fact, Dan Persick's locker was right next to hers because of alphabetical order. Pelbry, Persick. It seemed like that could mean something. Or not. She decided to try Deb and Dan. No one called her Deb, but it was a legal nickname for Deborah. She tried it. Deb, Dan, you cross out both D's, you're left with E-B-A-N, which is 4 letters, and 4 stands for M, which stands for married. Not that she believed in it. She removed the page from her spiral notebook, folded it in half, put it in the desk drawer under some pencils, and whipped through some quadratic equations. She didn't exactly get what they were for, but she could solve them. Then she discovered her favorite meal in 3 paragraphs of German, while scraps of the day floated randomly in and out of her head. The scrap that kept popping up was the one where Dan Persick said hi to her. "Debbie Pelbry," he'd said. "Hello there." He said it when she was standing in front of her open locker in her bunny-free jeans. That were the right length. But he had caught her unaware. Sometimes that was good. It meant you didn't have time to freeze up and you could behave like a normal person and have a natural response. And then sometimes it meant you looked startled, like a bunny at a loud noise. Like a bunny at any noise. That was sort of natural, too, in a way, and could have a certain kind of charm, she thought. She hoped. "Oh!" she had said involuntarily, startled bunny response. Then, "Hi!" Her mind dissolving into a rosy, patchy fog that drifted to the skin on her face, leaving a vacancy in her head. Something else. She needed to say something else. What? What? "How's it going?" Dan Persick said it. Just when Debbie thought of saying it, he said it, and now she needed to come up with another idea. He said it in a friendly way, almost flirting. He talked that way to everyone. Even so, it was pretty irresistible. What should she say back, though? Something funny, something friendly and funny and light and also irresistible. But soon, time was passing, seconds, eons were slipping by. Dan Persick had paused, looking at Debbie, waiting for her to answer. She had to say something. "Fine," she said. "It's going fine." Oh, barf, she thought. "Good," he said. "That's good." He smiled at her. It was a really nice smile, and something about it made her laugh just a little bit. "What's so funny?" he asked with curiosity. "I don't know," she said. "Nothing." She really didn't know, but a couple times during the day they passed in the hall, and he looked at her and said, "What's so funny?" And each time she smiled involuntarily, blushed, and said, "Nothing. Nothing is funny." It wasn't much, she knew that, but it felt like something to her. She couldn't help thinking about it, about Dan Persick and his smile. As she read her science assignment, the brief exchange took on the proportions of a TV miniseries, appearing in a variety of settings and situations. "What's so funny?" he would say to her with his irresistible, curious, interested smile as they walked down the hall together at school. As they sat on their beach towels on the grass at the pool at Bouquet Park, as they wandered through the golden green fields of the brief Siberian summer, as in the old version of Dr. Zhivago, recently on TV. "I don't know," she would say, smiling enigmatically. "Nothing," pushing a sun-bleached strand of hair behind her ear, like Julie Criss do. He wasn't really a donkey. Dan Persick was under a spell, conferred by a magic jersey and a powerful position of lucky genes and emerging hormones. The spell gave him special powers. He was having a lot of fun with it. Who wouldn't? He was untroubled, which made him even more appealing. It was a time-sensitive spell with a catch. He didn't know that yet. Here was the deal. He had to somehow learn certain lessons involving humility, compassion, respect, and independent thinking. Math and verbal skills would also be useful. Actually, these are the same lessons everyone has to learn, but part of the spell was a blinder effect that made it a lot more difficult. It could take 5 minutes or 5 years or forever. It wasn't clear how it was supposed to happen. Probably through encountering certain significant persons, like maybe a sick person, an old person, a dead person, and a monk in a yellow robe. A white rabbit, a hookah-smoking caterpillar, and a walking deck of cards. Or it could be a lonely misfit, a shy girl, and a wrinkled crone bearing magic pieces of fruit. It could be almost any combination of people or events. The key was, something had to penetrate his golden aura and touch his soul. If he learned these lessons, he would get to keep some of the special powers, though they would matter less because he would have some new ones. If he didn't learn them, he would remain a large, furry, willfully stupid animal. If he learned just some of them, he would be somewhere in between, but any would be better than none. The likelihood of any one result was completely unpredictable. In the meantime, he had to maintain a C average to stay on the team. It wasn't that difficult. He wrote his name and the date at the top of the paper, all in capitals, with a sharp, slashing slant. The house is empty when Hector took out his guitar and he left his bedroom door wide open. He opened the notebook on his desk to the back and flipped forward a few pages until he found his newest song. The new idea he was trying with this song was that, since he wasn't good enough at finger-picking to do it and sing at the same time, he was going to strum while he sang, and in between verses he would do the finger-picking. Besides the fact that it was the only way he could do it so far, it seemed like that's when people would notice it more anyway. He thought the refrain of the song was really a good one. Basically, he just wanted to sing the refrain over and over, but he knew he had to break it up with some verses, so he was working on that. Here's how the refrain went. And it's fine, totally fine, all of the time. It sounded so good he hoped someone hadn't already written it. That could happen. How would you know? What was brilliant, Hector felt, was that the word said fine, totally fine, and so on, but it had this minor key sound, so you were left thinking, well, is it fine? Or maybe it isn't. He didn't have the verses or a tune for the verses yet, but he had a feeling about them. A bittersweet feeling. The verses should be about things that weren't really fine at all, but, or maybe, there should be a verse or two about things that really were fine. He couldn't decide if it should be about social injustice or about the human condition or about love. Maybe all of them. Maybe one verse each. You could have the same reaction to each one. You could say the same words with different feelings. And it's fine, totally fine, all the time. It could be dark, bitter, ironic. Or it could be light, joyful, carefree. Pick a feeling. You could feel it when you sang these words. It should be a song about... Sometimes Hector had heard a day or so ago came back to him, unexpectedly. He had been in the grocery store, NJ's, the neighborhood one with wood floors where you could sign a charge sheet and they would send your parents a bill at the end of the month. A mother and her little girl were at the checkout in front of him. The little girl wanted to whisper something. Her mother leaned over and listened, then said to the cashier, "She's excited because she has a new toy cash register at home. She says maybe when she grows up she can run a real one." The cashier laughed. She said, "I used to play with a toy cash register when I was little too, and see, my dream came true." She was entirely pleasant and cheerful saying this, and yet there was some kind of other knowledge in it too. A knowledge that it sure as heck wasn't her dream come true. But, oh well, here she was. There was some kind of totally fine clue there, but it was such a good line itself that Hector decided to save it for its own song. He wrote, "And see, my dream came true," in his notebook. That one could have 1,000,000 verses. He still didn't know what the verses would be for Totally Fine, so he fiddled around with chords and notes looking for a tune. Periodically, he went into the refrain. He was also thinking about his voice, finding his own voice. Liz had talked about it the night at the coffee house, but Hector wasn't sure what it meant. Did you have to just take it as it came out of your throat? If you tried to improve it or try out some other kind of voice, was that fake, or could it all be part of your own voice? He tried singing totally fine in a slow, deep, gravelly voice. Then a falsetto. Papa Bear, Mama Bear. He felt silly. He sang it in a sarcastic, angry shout, which he knew wasn't his voice, but it was kind of fun, so he did it several times, standing up and really slamming the chords. He jumped up and down a little and spun around. Ren was standing in the doorway watching him. "It's just you," she said. "It sounded like more." It bothered Patty that electrons were so constantly in motion. It made the whole world seem like a place on the verge of disintegration. What if the molecules in this chair suddenly got all excited and spun apart? What if they realigned themselves and decided to be something other than wood? It was one of the many areas of science that she preferred not to think about, the very small atoms because they were so busy, and the very large universe, infinity, time because they were so unending. Also relativity in the universe turning back in itself, whatever that was supposed to mean. Picture a man on a train, picture trees going by. Yeah, sure. It was nothing like those things. She was going to have to take her chances on actual people in trains with actual trees going by because the other stuff, the guy who gets younger because time is moving sideways next to his train, which science teachers seemed to feel was so exciting, made her feel like there was no ground beneath her feet. It gave her the creeps. Patty wondered if her aversion to these ideas would relegate her to a job pouring coffee at a diner in the future. She hoped the diner would be on Earth. She hoped the coffee would be great, and the cups. And how soon is all this going to really kick in? She glanced over her shoulder at her room to make sure that it hadn't reconfigured itself while her back was turned. She went downstairs and called Debbie on the phone, letting their conversation block out any thoughts about the expanding and compacting molecules that were simulating Debbie's voice in her ear. For Russell, the grass was still wet from the rain that had fallen earlier in the day, but the twilight sky was clearing, and, in the west, an evening star hung a few inches above a deep pink and orange fringe, tail end of the sunset. Russell's sneakers were getting soaked. He lifted the lid, dropped the garbage in, and pressed the lid back on firmly to keep the raccoons from getting into it. He saw that a styrofoam cup had fallen outside the can, and when he bent to pick it up, something else caught his eye. It was some sort of necklace, a slender chain with flat gold letters linked together in the middle of it. He thought it was probably something belonging to his little sister Annette, but when he held it up to the fading light, the letters seemed to spell Debbie. He took it into the house, into the bright light of the kitchen. It still spelled Debbie. There was a tiny red gemstone dotting the I. Russell wondered what the necklace was doing in his backyard, how it had gotten there, and which Debbie it belonged to. There were a lot of Debbies, 3 that he knew of. Probably there were even more. He pictured himself going around to all the Debbies, asking them if this was their necklace. "I found this in my backyard. Is it yours?" He didn't want to do it. He decided he would turn it in to the lost and found at school, and he put it in the pocket of his jacket, hanging in the hall closet, where it stayed for a while, because the next day was sunny and warm. For Phil and Lenny, back in the evening before the sunny day, Phil was shooting baskets. He'd finished his homework at school. Lenny heard the ball bouncing on cement and boinging on the backyard board, and went over. He sat on the low wall in Phil's backyard while Phil kept shooting. Sometimes one or the other of them would say something, not saying much, but with the feeling of talking that is a good prelude for going home and going to bed. A while later, when he finally did slip into his bed, Lenny felt a weight on his feet. Oops, he thought. He reached down and dropped his unopened schoolbooks onto the floor. As he fell asleep, he heard the muffled thunk of heavy objects settling into new positions down in the basement. End of chapter 16.